a Tier 2 exodus, 2 weeks of matches, and a pivotal point for Overwatch as an esport. All of that and more this week on The Control Point. Welcome back, everybody, to The Control Point. I'm Paulsible. With me, as usual, is Kenobi and lafon. And this week, we've got some bittersweet announcements that we have to start the show with. After that, we'll check out the highlights of these last 2 weeks of matches, which have been pretty fun, and then preview the upcoming week in the Overwatch League. But first, the show must go on, everyone. And we did actually take a hiatus from the show last week as everybody was unable to get there. So that's an awkward title to start the show on, realistically speaking. But the Overwatch League doesn't stop for us. And they kept on going. Sure, all the homestands for the rest of the year have been canceled due to everything that has been going on. But Overwatch League is still working on a solution for the playoffs and the grand finals, and all the online matches will proceed as scheduled. So, good stuff there. Now, let's move on to the bittersweet here, Kenobi and lafon. We've got a lot of tweets coming out. People like Shadowburn, Taimou, Hip, even Sugar Free, all announcing their retirement, quote unquote, but at the very least, they'll leave from Overwatch.
Yeah, and I mean, this one hurts. This one hits me hard, actually. I started Overwatch, during its beta time. I've seen a ton of people come and go in the lifespan of Overwatch, but I think this is the first time I've seen this many people leave all at once and with no real up and coming. That second wave isn't there to kind of replace them at the moment. So I have a lot of memories and thoughts that are going into here, but I think we can start off with Shadowburn. We think of the Philadelphia Fusion, obviously, but even back to FaZe when he was playing on that roster before the Overwatch League. And I think, you even go to Taimou, Apex Season 1, right? The only Western team to win a Korean tournament. There's history here. And I think it's tough to put just how much this means to me as a member of this community, as a caster, and so on. And I think, Kenobi, you agree. I think you'd agree with me just as much, is that this has been a rough day for Overwatch fans.
Yeah, it's been a day where sometimes it's, you want to keep looking at social media, but it just continues that kind of cycle downward where you're seeing all of these notices. And I haven't been around Overwatch as long as lafon has been, but I definitely have been entrenched in the community for at least the last 3 years. And these are names, while I can't go back to FaZe and Apex, I've watched and seen a lot of clips from these players, and it's sad to see this old guard kind of go along. And when you mention it, that there's not this extra wave, right? That's not there anymore, because they're also leaving, and that's really kind of what hits hard. Like, if Sugar Free is so good and would have been an absolute stud in Overwatch League, it's a shame that he was as young and there's issues with the age and whatever, but that's a person who that really hurts. That's the one I think that it's this is real, this is happening, and it's just a shame that we're at this position right now, and hopefully there's success for them down the line. But for Overwatch, it's a pretty sad day. We're not going to sugarcoat it for you. It's how it is.
I want to take a moment. I want to take a moment before we go on, Paul, because I want to highlight two different thoughts really in these retirements. I want to talk players like Hip up, because I think the way they left was good, was healthy, was intelligent. Hip clarified,
I think.
Far as well, Faz as well, who was a former tier 2 player, one of the best main supports back on Rise Nation way back in the day. But I want to talk about how they sort of left their mark on Overwatch in a positive light, to my mind. They're moving on to other games where they're going to, take a wholesome and intelligent look forward. They're moving on to be coaches. They're moving on to other esports, and they're appreciating what Overwatch had, what the Overwatch community gave them, what they gave to the community in a lot of cases. So I want to give special credit to. I mean, Hip recognized that his health was failing, and to be at the top of your game and to step away because your health is failing is a tremendously difficult thing to do. So I think I want to give extreme credit to those players for having the maturity to recognize when something isn't working for them and making that call.
Well, we got to make the call to move on here, though, because we've just got simply too much to talk about, and there's still a lot of good Overwatch being played. to stick around on some sad notes. Let's move on to a lighter subject, a more fun subject. Kenobi this week, Lastro and Rascal.
Is that a fun subject? This isn't fun for them.
The initial part is fun. The later part maybe not so much, as they do get fined $1,000 for having some fun in the match chat.
And so they came out. If you guys weren't watching, I don't know. Are we gonna get demonetized if we actually say the words that like?
Let's just
They said some choice words in that, like some vulgarity, at least I think is the word that I would use best for it. But they used some vulgarity in match chat. It was visible to the stream, and they were both fined $1,000 for it. And Overwatch League, the producer Backpack Matt, actually clarified that this was told to them prior to the game, that the match chat would be visual, which is kind of why once it happens, Super starts freaking out in match chat, like, why what are you guys doing? You know, you can't, no, don't do this. But I think, I mean, you have to kind of set that, I guess, barrier, but it's unfortunate that they're getting fined for it, where it's like, it's, if they like, I don't want to believe that they knew that that was going to be on stream, right?
Well, and to be fair, there might have been some kind of communication.
Like, that's what I want to believe. It's
between
like
language barriers.
Yeah, that's what I want to believe. It's like some miscommunication, between the, whoever was telling them this, and that's kind of where we are at this moment. But unfortunately, they are going to take the fine. Nothing, at least it's not like a suspension of games, because that would be like really egregious. But this is this is the most slap on the wrist you could give someone at this point.
Pretty much. Well, and how do we feel about match chat being on in general? There have been some mixed points of view coming across social media this week. Lafon, I'm going to start with you.
It's a rough place for me, because on the one hand, all my sensibilities as a broadcaster is like, no, match chat should not be on stream. I don't think, I've been in too many broadcasts where you don't want to have, like, it's been drilled into us for the longest time, match chat hidden all the time. But at the same time, I can also recognize that players have personalities that you want to come through, and match chat's one of the easiest ways to kind of display it. So on the one, I'm very torn on this. I'm very torn. I think at the moment, what I would rather see is I would rather see match chat be, in an API somewhere, and then you could call to it, and then you could gain access to it if you want to opt in. That way you have players who don't have to, now granted, you would still find players that did something fine, or punish players that did something extreme, with, heaven forbid, but let's, for the sake of argument, say it's something beyond the pale of whatever. In this case, I think if you were to tune into match chat, you were to see this and you opted in, the words that Rascal and Lastro wrote, I think would be more than acceptable. So for me, if that was a way you could do that, I think that would be the real way to move forward. But ultimately, it's a tough place to be. I think it's entertaining. I just don't think it's proper for the mainstream.
Well, let's move on to that mainstream, actually, because we have quite the array of games to cover here between the last 2 weeks. Let's start with some of the double features that we got, like the Charge and the Spark. But come to think of Charge and Spark, when we were prepping for this show, we all agreed 10 maps of Overwatch might have been played between these two teams, but nothing actually of importance happened. So let's move on to the more interesting series, Shock and the Valiant. The Shock lost their first match against the Valiant, and not only that, they went 0-2 in the first weekend of online matches, but this week they were able to bounce back some.
I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, Moth is back on his main character. He's back on the Lucio. This is where he excels.
He carried.
He carried. He's a carry player on Lucio. You said it best there, Kenobi. And I think, there's an interesting thing. ANS, Ants, and Striker and Rascal came in, Sinatra and Architect taking a substitute position. So I think for the Shock, there was an element of their players, just the choices they had in the previous ban did not work to their hero pools, and B, just some odd choices in their DPS department that the looks were changed in week 9, and I think it really bought so much space for them.
Well, and Kenobi, let's move on to the other team here, because I don't feel like this is a sour spot for the Valiant whatsoever. Sure, I mean, they lost the second match in a 1-3 fashion, but you got to be happy that you're taking it to the grand champs of 2019 at all.
And I think a lot of it has to do with Packing 10 specifically, who
Mhm.
is the coach. And I think he's done a really fantastic job bringing these players together. I mean, they beat San Francisco pretty handedly in that first week, and Dreamer had some pretty good moments, I'd say, on the main tank. But there were a lot of times where it was Super who was kind of just dominating him in the neutral. There were a couple of times like that, but unfortunately for the Valiant, they weren't able to come through. But I like a lot of the pieces that I'm seeing. McGravy's actually been kind of um a revelation, I'd say, on the
Yeah.
diva. He's always been like a good diva, and like he's always been like a pretty like solid flex tank player. But these current like these past couple of matches that I've seen, he's been very good, especially on diva. And we'll get to this a little bit later, but this might hinder them as we go into the previous weeks. But I think this is where Valiant can definitely keep their head held high. And that new skin, like the blue and yellow one, in client looks actually pretty decent. Like I actually like those colors.
A lot of people were judging that color change
Yeah.
when we came into this season, but it's turning out all right.
Yeah.
It's turning out all right. Let's stay on the Valiant though, because their next match was a bit of a heartbreaker for the Valiant. They played up against the Fuel in that same weekend, and it was so close up until the very end. But lafon, finally, the Fuel get a win on the board. It's been so long.
Mr. 300K takes the curse of the 300 days away. Decay comes in absolutely clutch. And I think this is one of the cases where we can say this was a top performance by a player on a character, full stop.
Yeah.
I think
Mhm.
Decay redefined what Tracer can do. I think we can say after that performance specifically, that is one of the best Tracer performances to have happened.
Yeah,
I think that's a fair claim you could make. And one thing we didn't talk about is sort of the meta of the weekend, the flavor of the weekend. That's going to happen quite a bit as we move through these online matches with the bans, especially. But I think with the fact that NA was playing a lot of Torbjorn, and we think about how the turret can also put a ton of pressure on the Tracer on the flank, Decay did an admirable job, and it really opened up the Dallas Fuel to take their first win in 302 days.
Yeah, that's a
You're approaching a year there, and that's not a good mark. But
Yeah.
thankfully, they're gonna keep far away from that one. But it wasn't just Decay. It wasn't just the Tracer or the
Mhm.
DPS even that we got to talk about. The main tanks were
Yes.
popping off between both of these teams, Kenobi.
It was a really the Reinhardt battle. Reinhardt battles are actually like always like really fun to watch, especially if they're
So
playing at
fun.
their like really like high level. Like there's so many shatters and mind games, and Gamsu and Dreamer really put on a show. I mean, unfortunately for Dreamer, towards the back end of that game on Oasis, I believe he had some really big screw ups with his shatters, like really
Sure.
disastrous shatters, which at this point in the match had like basically turned into win conditions, right? And Gamsu, I mean, it's amazing how kind of long he's been playing this game and just in esports in general, and he still like has these moments where he's just like really good. And yesterday was incredibly impressive on that Reinhardt. A lot of the shatters he was hitting, his main tank positioning, they were also like peeling really well for him. I think when he's able to play this Ryan, I think he is like at this level. I think
Mhm.
Dallas looks so good, especially like he's making so much room just for like Decay and Doha, which I think is exactly what you need.
One
I'm
thing
so
I would
excited
highlight quickly
to
before
play
we head
always.
off from the Fuel is that Gamsu, one thing we should note is that he was playing against double shotgun. They were playing with a Tracer on their team.
Yeah.
That's actually really tough for the Reinhardt to do. So credit to Gamsu in the fact that if he seemed like he was just only kind of feeding, the fact that he wasn't mega turbo inting is actually surprising to me. So I think that's the mark of Gamsu playing a fantastic match, and you have to sort of parse the hero differences to really identify that Gumps was playing fantastically throughout the entire series.
Yeah, and the Fuel played honestly pretty dang well, at all things considered,
Mhm.
right? Got to give it to every member of that squad. But let's move on to some different teams. Let's talk about Justice and the Fusion. Kenobi, we were all pretty excited for Justice coming into this year, right?
I don't.
Stage
I
4
wasn't.
went
I
well,
wasn't.
relatively speaking, compared to the first 3 last year. We looked at players like Corey and Stratus and thought maybe they can get something done. But right now, Justice are kind of hurting.
It's weird because when I first looked at this team going in, they didn't really make that many huge changes. They kept Corey and Strategy, which I think you have to do after the way they performed in that stage 4.
Obviously.
They brought on Roar. I believe Aim God was also brought onto this team. He wasn't there last season, if I remember correctly. So there were some changes, but they only have 7 players on their roster, right? And the addition, like they made Tuba as their addition. This team, the issue that I find with him is that everything that like Corey has to play and Corey leaves to play to someone else, he can just play better than. Like when Tuba's on Reaper, Corey just straight up has a better Reaper than Tuba does. It's not even close, but he has to play Torbjorn, and then they have to sub out Stratus, and like there isn't that other person on that team that can carry with Corey or for Corey or take some of the, take some of the pressure off of him and make sure that they're making something impact. Like Tuba has some nice moments where he has some good Death Blossoms, but that'll always happen. They're a dime a dozen in this current meta. And I think every time I look at Justice, I say, what else is there besides Corey? And Corey, to be frank, should be on a different team. If he's on like a different team, they probably like this team doesn't really do anything without Corey. If it's just Tuba and Stratus, they absolutely are nowhere near this good. And Corey's the only one who's keeping them afloat.
Seems like his backpack isn't nearly big enough for the entirety of the Washington Justice. But let's move on to a team that doesn't need backpacks. They don't need hard carries, even though they have them in abundance. The Fusion, after a rough loss to the Paris Eternal, this was a great match for them to come back in on.
Yeah, this is just a confidence building match. It's no offense to Justice fans or the Justice players, but kind of sort of an easy game for the Philadelphia Fusion. And hey, speaking of easy game, what better way to get your Overwatch League debut? Hisu steps in, he turns 18, he gets his first match, and actually that marks an interesting factoid. Every single Runaway member that joined the league this year also picked up their first win in their first match. So a little fun fact for you there.
That's such a that stat is so crazy. Just imagine that that Runaway team. That's nuts, dude.
We're good.
We'll see if they can keep that dynasty going here. But let's move on to the future. Let's talk about the upcoming week of matches. And first and foremost, we got to talk about the new hero pool. Kenobi, Damage, gone. Sombra and Reaper, out. Diva, no longer here, and Ana will also be taking a rest. How do we feel about this? Just looking at it superficially.
So I'm a little bit sad that Diva's the one that got banned, because I think the game is a little bit more high impact and intense when Diva's in the roster, because if there's no Diva, sometimes it'll just like go to double shield, and no one really likes double shield.
You can't take as many risks without that defense matrix.
So that's gone. That's one that I would like to have back. Ana, I think that probably means that we're going to see a little bit. We're probably going to still see. I think if we play more of these rush compositions, which I'm not sure how much we can do that anymore since Reaper's out of the meta. But I think Moira Lucio is still something that we're going to probably see quite a bit of. Sombra not being in the meta is good, because I think the players hate playing against Sombra. Hack is just too much of a nuisance to deal with.
Shu is happy.
Yeah, Shu is dead. Shu is praising the sun right now, the fact that Sombra's not there anymore. And Reaper, we saw just how impactful he is with Lucio on a team, and when he can actually being able to move forward and brawl, and how good he is also against things like Doomfist, which was kind of prevalent in the meta as well. So I think these bans, the meta will change a little bit. There might be dive from a certain team, but besides that, I think we're going to stay mostly the same.
I think it's going to go to a double shield look, probably the Arisa Sigma again, unfortunately. The Diva just takes, she is, I think she's the great equalizer. She's probably the only character in the game that, mitigates some of the lesser appreciated parts of Overwatch. It's probably the nicest way I can put it. I don't want to get that $1,000 fine that Rascal and Lasker got. So there's that. I think, we will probably end up seeing a double shield, but this really is more of a nerf to the composition that China was running this weekend, or last weekend rather, I should say. They ended up with the Sombra Reaper a ton more, whereas NA again had more of the Reaper Torbjorn for the double shotgun. So I'm curious to see how that evolution comes through again between China and NA.
Well, we've got some things like the McCree back in the lineup too. So let's move on to some specific matches. First up, I think the spiciest one coming up this weekend is the Funis? Oh man, I'm tired. The Fusion versus the Eternal. Lafon, this is a rematch that I'm so excited for. The last time these two teams squared off, it was tooth and nail, but this time the Fusion can play Hisu should they choose to do so.
I think this actually favors the Fusion now more because if you'll remember back to that 3-2 win that the Eternal had over the Fusion, a large part of it came down to the fact that EQO was playing hitscan. He's not by nature, not by trade, a hitscan player. He's a flex player who tends towards the projectile side of things. XC and Soon were, more pop off in those last moments, Tracer and Soldier respectively. I think now that you can play the double hit scan with two hit scan players in Carpe and Hisu, Fusion should be really given the edge here a ton. I think this is going to be a great match. You've got across the board fantastic players. Hanbin versus Poco is another one. So I think this is going to be probably the best match of the weekend.
I think one of the interesting things I'd like to notice about this game as well is, are we going to see Doomfist? Because we have Nico past weekend, he's taking notes from Sparkle because he looks like the first time I played Doomfist this season, awful. Now looks amazing at Doomfist and was really pivotal in their win against the Houston Outlaws, against one of the better Doomfists in Blase. So he's going to probably be going up against Carpe, who is another phenomenal Doomfist in his own right. So that's another matchup that I'm going to be looking out for.
It's the teachers from the bench, the matchup of the teachers from the bench, Chipsa versus Sparkle.
Yeah, I was literally about to make the Chipsa joke there, but let's move on, Kenobi, to talk about one of your favorite subjects, the Chengdu Hunters, because they're going to be going up against the Titans this weekend.
Right.
And praise be to the Yoda Chad, the Wrecking Ball is going to be off the bench for Among.
It showed this last weekend. I mean, I predicted that Chengdu would lose both of their games because just how that team is way too reliant right now on Hammond. And to be fair, I think with Hammond back in the lineup, they can take a fight to the Titans. The Titans are really good though, and I am worried about Chengdu for sure. What I want to know is our Titans going to be able to deal with Jinmu? Because Jinmu is a star player. I think on Ferris specifically with Veltil, I think you put him under there's the top 5 players and then Jinmu. He's right there. I think he's phenomenal at that character. I think he's a phenomenal DPS player. He's what I want. I think one of my friends, Volmelt, said it the way, he's what I wanted Leave to be, right? He's exactly that type of player.
I think everyone's underselling Leave. Actually, I think Leave has been fantastic this season, and he's continued to show that. And he's only gotten better as the games have gone on. Every time I see Leave play,
dude,
his teamwork could use some polish. But I think as games go on, he's gonna get better and better at that. I think another thing too is Molly has just been a straight up upgrade for the Chengdu Hunters. So the question is going to be, how do the Titans show up? Because the Hunters have playtime. They've had time to actually game in front of an audience, whereas the Titans have been kind of iced since the last time we've seen them.
Yeah, absolutely. Fusion and Rain, though, another matchup for the Fusion, as they're going to have a double hitter this weekend. The question here, Lafon, we have to ask is who is going to stand atop the Atlantic Division? Because between these two teams, Eternal and the New York Excelsior, it's been a battle back and forth and all over the place. Fusion and the Atlanta Reign are both going to look to put some distance between themselves and the other contenders here.
Yeah, I think for Atlanta, this is your marquee match. This is the match that you have to win. You've got Edison, you've got Erster, who are both fantastic players. You could make an argument for top 5 in the league at the DPS role for both. And I think here Atlanta needs to stop being the team that's like, oh yeah, we heard from the Scribbucks Exchange that they're good. We need to see that now. This is where you have to you put your money down and you're saying, no, we are good. Here's where we're going to stand from it. We know the Fusion are fantastic and they've only gotten better, but I think now we need to say who the real Reign are.
Well, we also need to see who the real Shock are, though, as we're going to quickly jump on to our last preview match, because they're going to have their rematch for the season against the Los Angeles Gladiators. Now, they already got revenge on one LA team. Do we think they can pull it off 2 times in a row, or are the Gladiators going to put up a bit more of a fight than the Valiant did?
They're going to Gladiators are going to put up more of a fight than the Valiant did. I think Gladiators are a better team. There's no question about that in my mind. I think the question is going to be, are the Shock going to show up? Because I don't think they did in week 8 when they played against the Valiant and Gladiators in the same weekend. I think this week we saw an element of the Shock show up, but even still, they dropped a map to the Valiant and at times looked kind of weak. So I want to see from the Shock that same level of swagger. We're seeing it from part of their roster. I saw it from Super a lot. I saw it from Rascal a lot, but there are times where just Joy will just essentially walk off the side of the map. So
Yeah.
I need to see from the Shock more consistency, which is not something I expected, I would say, this early into season 3. And it's something that Shock need to sort of regain their footing on for sure.
And for Gladiators on the other side of the coin, this is where they need to prove that they are like a legit threat. I mean, they have they did beat them last time. They have a lot of good talent, especially if Doomfist does come into the meta. Mirror. Phenomenal Doomfist in his own right, and Ken has that hard carry potential. So I think for Gladiators, this is where you kind of cement yourself as being one of the better teams in Overwatch League that can compete for that top spot.
I think this is going to be a 3-2. It's going to go to the 5 maps because I think
I agree. Yeah, it goes
be at toe-to-toe. Yeah.
There's a lot of good games this weekend. Like a lot of good games that are
so many good games. We didn't have a chance to cover them all, and we got to move on, folks. That'll do it for the meat of our show, the main portion. But now we've got overtime. If this is your first time tuning into the Control Point, allow me to explain how this works. I'm going to quickly throw questions at these two wonderful analysts here. That's the only time you'll ever hear me say that. And they got to answer on this topic as quickly as possible. Do the exact opposite of what I just did, where my brain just stuttered for a moment. But with that, let's move in to overtime. First off, Kenobi, it feels like forever ago, but the April Fool's joke was this week, and the googly eyes hit everything in Overwatch.
I thought it was really great. My favorite personally is either the headless pharaoh one with the googly eyes or the dragon strike. The dragon strike was phenomenal. Just seeing that come at you with googly eyes, that's hilarious.
All right, let's move on. Lafon, we've had so many rematches in these past few weeks. Charge versus Spark. Both LA teams playing Shock twice. How do we feel about back-to-backs this back-to-back?
Let's pretend that the Shock and Spark, the Spark and the Charge never played, because as far as I can tell, they didn't. 10 maps notwithstanding. But I think in general, it's just a case of the world we live in right now. Not much can be done about it. And for that matter, I'm just happy we get to see some good Overwatch.
Kenobi, some of the Overwatch League talent is forming the first ever professional Valorant team here. And honestly, that made for some great content.
It's some really good content. If you haven't already, you should go check out the Tier 7 videos, support those guys who are making some fantastic comment. I was dying this morning when I was watching that video. It was so well made, so funny, so well written. Definitely go check it out.
Lafon, the Fuel coaches are back in the spotlight. This has been a point of contention for the entirety of the Fuel's history, no matter who's been filling out the coaching spots.
We real sports now is all I can say, because, hey, you're not doing well. The coach is the first one on the hot seat. And in all honesty, they have probably every right to be there. Interested to see how the Fuel shape up in the next couple of matches, because that will make a huge difference for a couple of job spots, I'm thinking.
Speaking of being in the hot seat, the Spark have been having a rough time, and they haven't played their newest player that I know somebody here was very much looking forward to, Kenobi. Coldest, yet to hit the stage.
I mean, Coldest is like my favorite player, like coming from Chinese contenders, so I'm a little bit sad. I understand why they're not paying him, because it's, it's a full Korean roster, there's a language barrier, but
play him, you cowards.
I think he would be an upgrade to Bebe. I think he's a straight up upgrade to Bebe. So play, what, LaFon, sure, play him, you cowards. Let's go.
Speaking of playing people who aren't cowards, the Hunters, LaFon, brought in Langsa and a Ting. They had a little bit of a rough time with those, and they also had Among on Winston, Reinhardt, Arisa, anything that he could get his feelers on this weekend. Hunter's having an interesting time.
I'm still not sure that the Ameng on Winston is not a deepfake. Listen, if you can find proof that it's not a deepfake, I will believe you. But until that happens,
I can't. He's always dead, LaFon, on my screen. It doesn't matter. There's no reason to. I can't find proof. There's always a red X over his name in the top left. I can't do anything.
It's questions that science simply can't answer.
He doesn't get to play Winston so much as he gets to play an alt battery. But that'll be it for this week on the Control Point. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And if you enjoyed, follow Elo Hell Esports on Twitch or YouTube, wherever it is that you are watching this. And follow all of us hosts here on Twitter. We sure appreciate it. We'll be back next week, same time, Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific, discussing the evolution of online matches and previewing Week 11 of the Overwatch League. Stick around for the post show where we slow it down here on Twitch Live and just chat with the Twitch chat about whatever comes to mind. For now, it's been Paulsible, Kenobi, and lafon. We'll see you next week on the Control Point.